Work situation. How do I resolve this? M24, F22. I am a very new manager at a restaurant. There is an individual, let's call him Kyle, age 24, who began working around the same time I, age 22, started my management training. Technically, I am still classified as an hourly employee and do not possess the authority to hire, fire, or even discipline, so my interactions with other hourly employees are not strictly prohibited. I have been employed at this particular restaurant for approximately 4 years, starting out as a takeout employee and gradually advancing through various positions. This means I have not completely acclimated to the concept of being perceived as a manager rather than a coworker, if you understand what I mean. I still maintain close relationships with several employees, and when I first began my training, it definitely was not at the forefront of my mind to maintain a distance. I was in the latter stages of a challenging relationship when I met Kyle, and we immediately connected. I sensed a mutual attraction, but both of us were somewhat reserved about it. About a month and a half into our collaboration, we finally had a meaningful conversation, during which I subtly provided him with my phone number. At that time, he did not have a car, so I presented it as an offer to give him a ride if he needed one. One evening, he took me up on the offer, and after I dropped him off, he inquired if I had a boyfriend. I did not. I asked why it mattered, and he explained he didn't want to get into any trouble. He then exited the car, and that was the end of it. We were cordial at work, typically engaging in pleasant conversations. I took him home again, but I was still anxious about initiating a friendship outside of work, so I returned home. That same night, I mustered the courage to text him, asking if he preferred to spend time alone or with someone else. The approach worked, and he invited me over. I arrived at his apartment with a bottle of wine, and we sat at his kitchen table, listening to music. I drank my wine while he had his beer, and we talked for hours. It was around 4 a.m. by the time we realized how long we had been chatting. He really wanted me to stay, but since he lived in a studio apartment, he offered me his bed while he would sleep at the kitchen table to ensure I felt comfortable. Despite his insistence, I ultimately refused and made my way home. He texted me to check if I made it back safely, and we continued our normal routine. A few days later, he needed another ride and immediately invited me upstairs. I was completely unprepared but went up anyway, and once again, we just talked. Eventually, he made a move and kissed me. We kissed on his bed for a while, and when he attempted to remove my clothes, I stopped him. The reason is that I was not expecting things to progress so quickly. Previously, during our conversation, he had shared about his previous job at another restaurant, where he worked for 3 years after moving to the United States. He had met a girl there, who was also his manager, and they ended up dating for 2 years, living and working together, even though he started with no knowledge of English and she had no knowledge of Spanish. He told me that one day, she abruptly decided to break up with him, which felt sudden to him. A few weeks later, she was dating someone else, and he could no longer bear to work with her. So he had to find a new apartment and a new job. Then, his car broke down on the highway, literally catching fire, and that was when our boss called him to offer him the job at our restaurant. He believed it was fate because after the breakup, he had intended to remain single for some time, wanting to understand himself better. So, when we began making out, it was a surprise to me. However, I stopped him mainly because I was a virgin at that time. I had experienced sexual assault as a child, and I was genuinely unsure if I could enjoy sex, as each time I reached the point of penetration, I would panic, and my body would tense up, resulting in immense pain. I communicated all of this to him, and while he assured me he would be gentle, I wasn't ready. So we did not have sexual intercourse. Afterward, he reiterated that he wasn't prepared to be in a relationship and wasn't even planning to see anyone else in the meantime. But then he met me, and he couldn't resist getting to know me. He expressed a desire for us to be friends, stating that I was welcome at his home anytime, and we could just hang out or potentially do more in the future. He looked into my eyes and told me I had a beautiful heart and that he didn't want to hurt me. He appeared so sincere and kind. We spent more time together, just talking and kissing and removing clothing, but not going any further. We also engaged in oral sex during that period, which felt fun, enjoyable, and exciting. It felt exhilarating in a way that made the risks worthwhile. I would estimate we had been involved like this for about a month before I finally relented and we had penetrative sex. I won't sugarcoat it. When I say I gave in, I mean that he had persuaded me enough for me to say yes. He was not unkind, but I was not prepared, and he must have been aware of that. I should have stood up for myself more effectively, but I think it is important to mention. The day after was among the worst of my life as I relived the pain of what had happened to me as a child, and the way it resonated now was deeply unsettling. However, I did not disclose this to Kyle. I simply continued as if everything was normal. Throughout all of this, we remained friendly but not overtly so at work. After navigating that initial experience, we began to engage in sex more frequently. We would see each other 2 to 3 times a week to talk, drink, and be intimate. We worked together nearly every day too, but it did not seem to strain either relationship. He was making me watch Breaking Bad with him, and when we were together, it wasn't solely about sex. We conversed considerably. He shared all about his family and how he ended up here. We discussed our visions for the future, including having children. I genuinely felt that I was starting to know him, and as I am someone who tends to fall in love easily, I began to feel that as well. After about 3 months of this, we spent Thanksgiving together, and then there was an abrupt silence. At work, he suddenly seemed distant, as if I had done something to upset him, but I hadn't. The last time we saw each other, I got up, spoke to him, he told me to drive safely, and I left his apartment. There wasn't anything specific that I could identify as the cause of this shift, but something felt off. He wouldn't open my texts, and at one point I called and left a message, which was somewhat work-related, but he discussed my query with someone else instead of talking to me. It felt so strange, and I honestly began to spiral. A new girl started working with us, and I convinced myself that he was seeing her simply because she was attractive and nice. I had no other evidence. So I attempted to move on. Just when I felt like I was making progress, he texted me unexpectedly after about a month of silence. I folded immediately and went to his apartment. I tried really hard not to appear too invested. I had become somewhat guarded after my prior relationship experiences, and I didn't want to frighten him off by overwhelming him with my affection. I casually mentioned that I didn't think I would hear from him again. He seemed utterly taken aback and promptly asked why I would think that. I replied that I had not heard from him in a while and that he just seemed off. He stated that he was focused on himself and wanted to be alone for a bit. I jokingly remarked, "Oh, so you were like forget everyone else." His demeanor shifted at that moment. As I noted earlier, he has only recently become proficient in English, so a communication barrier sometimes exists between us, as I do not speak Spanish fluently either. He became anxious and assured me that he had not seen anyone else during our time apart and was just isolating himself. When we initially started our situation, he expressed that he did not want to date anyone but me, and we hadn't always used protection, which I know was irresponsible. So I really wanted to trust that statement. I explained that I meant he didn't want to see anyone, in the sense of avoiding others rather than in a romantic context. He responded with an, "Oh, sorry," and then asked if I had been seeing anyone else. I informed him that I had not, and he followed up with asking what I had been doing during that time. I laughed and told him that we saw each other nearly every day at work. He acknowledged that, but expressed his desire to know what I had been up to outside of work. My point is, he seemed to genuinely care about me. We spent more time together, and I thought everything had returned to normal. He had me over on Christmas, and we reminisced about our holiday traditions, which felt wonderful. That was, unfortunately, the last time I saw him outside of work. The following week was New Year's, and he came to work on New Year's Day looking incredibly hungover. He had always mentioned enjoying drinking, primarily to help him sleep. As far as I could tell, I had never seen him truly intoxicated. That week, he appeared to be normal with me, but I sensed something was amiss. I didn't press him, but the subsequent week brought severe snowstorms, and we were confined indoors for several days, causing our job to close. We checked in on each other's safety through texts. He had previously mentioned his dislike for texting, which I understood considering the language barrier. When we all returned to work, he shared that he had secured a second job in the mornings. I recognized that this meant I would see him significantly less since he would only have Wednesday and Friday mornings off, making it unlikely for him to invite me over when he needed to wake up at 5 a.m. I asked him how he planned to adjust to the schedule, and he revealed that he had stopped drinking after he nearly assaulted his stepfather around New Year's. This revelation caused me to connect a few dots. Perhaps he wasn't inviting me over anymore because he was genuinely trying to turn his life around, and I respected that. Did I miss him? Absolutely. But I felt proud that he was making an effort for his own well-being, so it didn't bother me too much. I texted him to see if he was awake, as he had often done to me, but he never responded. However, the next day at work, he seemed somehow normal again. At that point, I was so bewildered that my interactions with him during work became somewhat strained. I didn't know how to engage with him, and while I tried to be friendly, I think I may have overcompensated by attempting to appear unaffected by any suspicion regarding our relationship. I grew increasingly concerned when it marked the 4th week of not seeing him, so I decided it was time to share my feelings. In the early stages of our relationship, I felt he was infatuated with me, to the extent that I nearly backed away out of fear of allowing someone to love me. I didn't do that, and eventually, our dynamics appeared to shift. Nevertheless, I consistently tried to appear indifferent about my feelings for him, even though I was undeniably falling in love. He will always be my first, and I suspect that feeling will linger for quite some time. I have been in therapy for several years now, working on being present for myself, and part of that growth involves being more honest about my emotions. So, even though I doubted he felt the same way, I truly wanted to express that he was someone special to me. I texted him again about a week after the previous message, stating that I genuinely wished we could talk. That was the end of it. He did not respond, and I didn't press the matter. I never pushed him to speak while at work, seeking to keep our conversations solely as friends or coworkers. I made an effort to give him space, believing I was not crowding him excessively. For reasons I cannot pinpoint, everything changed. He started to exhibit a sour attitude, not only towards me but toward others as well. I attributed this to his newfound lack of sleep and exhaustion. Then, he almost didn't come to work one day due to car troubles, and another cook informed me about the situation. They mentioned that Kyle had been giving them a ride home when his car just shut down in the middle of the road. This cook, Xavier, seemed to pick up on my anxiety and somehow sensed my feelings for Kyle. I denied it, but Xavier appeared unconvinced, and I realized I had made a mistake. Approximately a week later, Xavier pulled me aside to inform me that Kyle had been speaking about me behind my back. He claimed that Kyle expressed disdain for having me in the kitchen or even in front of the kitchen on the expo line. He stated that Kyle wasn't talking to me and that somehow, Xavier was aware we had been intimate. I say, somehow, because I do not entirely trust Xavier, and I can't assume that everything he says is entirely truthful. It is entirely possible he made an assumption and was testing to see if it was accurate. This is the core issue here, the abundance of lies and betrayal. Regardless, it devastated me. How could Kyle suddenly begin to hate me without warning? I genuinely can't comprehend anything I might have done to evoke such a change in behavior. I never pressured him, was never unkind, did not make an issue out of things, and did not inundate him with messages. I treated him as I would anyone else. It feels as though he pulled a switch. Ever since Xavier disclosed this information, about a week and a half ago, I struggled to look at Kyle without feeling a knot in my stomach. The other cooks we were close to, as reported by Xavier, have also become disrespectful towards me. None of this makes sense. Xavier claims that Kyle never cared, but it is difficult for me to accept that. I acknowledge that I made mistakes and am not completely blameless, but I don't believe I deserve this treatment. My therapist suggests confronting Kyle and communicating that I am aware of what he has said and how it has affected me. I'm not even angry if his only interest in me was sex. I simply believe it would have been the decent thing to do to step back when he knew that he was taking my virginity, considering my circumstances. However, the way he currently treats me is just absurd. It's part of the reason I struggle to believe he truly doesn't care. Someone who genuinely doesn't care would simply leave me alone. If he were indifferent towards me, I could understand. Instead, he seems actively angry. I still catch him staring at me, sometimes even admiringly. I've managed to elicit a smile from him accidentally once or twice, but it's as if he puts on a scowl when he knows I am watching. If he believes I'm not noticing, he looks at me the same way he did when we first met. And for me, it feels the same. It's exhausting to invest the effort required to despise this man. Deep down, I still love him, and I want to resent him for how he's treating me, but it's incredibly difficult. I'm just uncertain about the best approach to take because none of this makes sense to me. Story 2. Am I the a-hole for setting boundaries with my mill and voicing how I feel finally? Okay, my mother-in-law and I seem to maintain a tolerable relationship. She was pleased when my husband and I initially got together, and the first comment she made about me was that I had childbearing hips and would make a good wife. A few months into dating my boyfriend, now husband, his parents divorced. This period was quite difficult for everyone, particularly for my boyfriend and his brother. Both of their parents somewhat lost control during this time. His mother had been a stay-at-home mom since she was expecting my husband, received a significant settlement from the divorce of $600,000, and does not work now or in the future. My boyfriend and I aligned more with his mother during the divorce, as we felt deep sympathy for her. Not only was she experiencing the challenges of divorce, but she also lost her father, with whom she was quite close, and she has her own health issues. When my boyfriend and I finally prepared to move out on our own, she generously gifted us $12,000 to help with our relocation and to provide us with a safety net. My boyfriend and I cohabited, and about 4 years into our relationship, we became engaged. My mother-in-law was thrilled, as the next step seemed to be grandchildren once the wedding was completed. We married after 5 years of dating, and I became pregnant very soon afterward. I believe it was 3 months after we tied the knot. We informed my mother-in-law as well as my mother, both of whom were very enthusiastic. However, around this time, it felt as if her attitude towards me shifted. Whenever she referred to the expected baby, she constantly called it my baby, which I initially dismissed. We invited them over for breakfast and were discussing the baby's arrival. I mentioned we would notify them when I was in labor, but I preferred that it be just my husband in the room. While we were enjoying brunch at my husband's and my home, she, accidentally, spilled her piping hot coffee on me. I exclaimed, "Oh," and got up to dab at the coffee stain with a towel, and she looked at me and asked, "What's wrong?" Seeming unaware that she had spilled coffee all over me. Following this, she repeatedly asked my husband if she could be present in the room and urged him to persuade me to allow her to be there. As my due date approached, I asked my husband if it would be all right to have my mother in the room during the delivery for support, to which he replied, "Of course, you're the one giving birth to a whole human." When the time arrived and I was in labor, my mom and husband were both by my side. We called my mother-in-law to inform her, and she quickly had her partner drive her over and waited in the waiting room, where she saw my stepdad. She called me and asked if my mother was in the room, and I said, "Yes." She claimed I was being unfair and insisted she needed to be present too, arguing my mom should not be the one to hold her baby first. Eventually, I acquiesced, feeling guilty and not wanting to come across as inconsiderate or deny her the chance to witness the birth of her grandchild. She joined us in the room, and throughout her time there, she made several comments directed at me. She complained that I was taking too long in labor, that her back hurt, that she was tired, etc. Eventually, she declared, "Well, if it's going to take this long, I'm getting a hotel room. Call me when my baby arrives." When the time came for me to push, we attempted to contact her but only reached voicemail, prompting my husband to call her partner. He claimed she was sleeping and would not wake her. We accepted this and continued. They arrived about an hour after the baby was born, and I handed the baby over to her. A few minutes later, the nurses took the baby for vaccinations. My mother-in-law and her partner departed soon after. Very shortly thereafter, when I logged onto Facebook, I noticed her partner had posted a picture of the baby, despite my husband being firm about not sharing any baby photos online as of yet. When I was discharged from the hospital, we notified them immediately, and they drove over to our residence. I was informed that I needed to apologize to my mother-in-law because she hadn't been able to hold the baby for long since the nurses had taken him for shots. I apologized and moved on since I didn't think it was worthwhile to argue about it. My mother-in-law frequently commented on my parenting and referred to herself as Mama when addressing the baby. My husband and I both worked from home and needed help with the baby, so we invited my mother-in-law to assist us, offering to pay her and provide transportation since she is not a good driver. Our only requests were that she not carry the baby around excessively due to her knee issues and her tendency to fall, and that she refrained from vaping while holding the baby and speaking negatively about her ex-husband. as we wanted to avoid such discussions around little ears. She was adamant about ignoring those requests whenever she believed we weren't watching. I witnessed her fall while holding the baby, and she attempted to lie about it. We also caught her vaping while holding the baby repeatedly. We have a camera in our living room, and from the corner of my eye, I saw her take a puff from her vape. I informed my husband, and when he addressed it, she claimed I was lying. He reminded her that we had a camera in the living room, which was no secret, having been there long before we had children, and asked if she wanted him to review the footage. She asserted that he was invading her privacy and insisted she would not accept such treatment. Later that night, while staying in our guest room, we heard her sobbing hysterically on the phone. It was 2 a.m., and since we lived in under 900 square feet, sounds traveled quite well. My husband knocked on her door to check if she was all right. She retorted that he was being disrespectful and needed to mind his own business. He left and returned to our bedroom. My husband's grandmother, my mother-in-law's mom, called us, inquiring why we were treating my mother-in-law poorly. She expressed concerns for our baby's safety. My mother-in-law deceived her, claiming we did not permit her to read to the baby and that we kept the baby locked in a box all day. Neither of these statements was true. When we confronted my mother-in-law, she denied everything. It is also important to mention that my husband and I attend marriage counseling. We faced numerous challenges in our marriage prior to initiating therapy. He confided in me about a significant addiction and sought help for it. We shared this with my mother-in-law, and she laughed dismissively, stating, "All men do it. What's the issue?" She failed to consider that her son was the one seeking assistance. One day, upon our return from therapy, she repeatedly inquired about our discussions. My husband mentioned contemplating reconnecting with his father. She exploded, accusing him of being a bad son for considering that, and continued to disparage his dad. A few days later, she claimed to be feeling dizzy. This is common for her, as she is on an excessive amount of medication for various issues. We took her blood pressure, and it was alarmingly high. My husband and I talked and decided that instead of having her over for 5 days, we would limit it to 2 or 3 since we were concerned about her health. She yelled at us for suggesting this, stating we were stripping her of her only joy in life, our baby. Later that day, she raised her voice again, saying we were not being fair to her. At this point, I admit I was the antagonist. I began yelling back. She responded that she would not tolerate being disrespected by my yelling, stating that I was a child while she was the adult, and I needed to listen to her. She called her partner to request that he leave his job and come to pick her up, saying no one wanted to communicate with her. To this, I exclaimed, "You're a liar. All I've done is try to communicate with you. I always ask for your opinions on things, and you never share how you feel. I am done." My husband volunteered to drive her home so that her partner wouldn't have to leave work. When she departed, I told her I was sorry for yelling, but I could not continue allowing her to walk all over me and treat me however she wished. A month passed without communication or visits. She reached out as if nothing had occurred, bringing up our baby's birthday party. I stated she was still invited, but that there would be no drama or hostility during the event, and she agreed. We celebrated the party, and she was relatively kind throughout. I believed everything was fine until my husband's brother called us saying, "Mom called me, and I know what she said isn't true, so could you tell me what really happened?" I was bewildered. He explained she had claimed that she never got to hold the baby, and that when she finally did, my mother ripped the baby from her hands. This was nowhere near the reality. She held the baby for approximately an hour. When the baby became fussy, she handed him to my husband, the father, who could not calm him down, so he returned the baby to me and left to prepare a bottle. My mother approached and asked if she could feed the baby, to which I replied yes, transferring the baby to her. His brother concluded that my account sounded more accurate. My mother-in-law's mother called us with the same inquiry, using identical phrasing. Instead of confronting my mother-in-law directly, we decided to go low contact for a while since I was at a loss for how to approach her. A few days later, I received a follow request on Instagram from an account named Shunned Mill, which had also sent me some rather hurtful messages. Initially unsure of who it belonged to, I eventually recognized a picture of my mother-in-law's dog with her house in the background, completely revealing her identity. I showed this to my husband, who felt like calling and scolding her, but I advised against it. Per his suggestion, I blocked that account, as well as her regular Instagram account, which had already followed me. She sporadically texted us sporadically, but my husband and I opted to ignore her or respond with one-word answers. After several months of this, it completely ceased. At the beginning of this year, my husband's grandfather, his father's dad, passed away. That same day, my mother-in-law called my husband and left a voicemail stating, "Someone better be dead or gravely ill for you to not be answering my calls." He texted her to inform her of his grandfather's death, and she expressed her sorrow while noting that she loved his grandfather but insisted she still wanted her answers. The following day, he called her to discuss everything. He expressed his displeasure with her consistently disregarding our requests regarding our child, no vaping, limited walking, and refraining from disparaging his father. He also mentioned his concerns over her fabricating stories about us to family, such as keeping the baby locked in a box or preventing her from reading, as well as the lie about my mother. She denied all allegations, asserting that nothing of the sort ever occurred. He countered with the information from his brother and her mother, to which she countered, "Well, I didn't think I would have to remind them not to tell you what I said." He also confronted her regarding the Instagram account, and she denied involvement, claiming I was being dishonest and attempting to ruin the relationship between her and her son. He insisted he had seen the account and recognized the photo of her dog, to which she replied, "What do you want me to say? That I did it. Fine, I did it. Are you happy?" She then began to cry hysterically, expressing anger over my decision to block her on Instagram. My husband reminded her that it was due to her sending me harassing messages from a fake account, after which he explained that he needed to return to work and hung up. Since then, she has attempted to text me, asking what she did wrong. I simply replied that we were both very hurt and needed time to heal. I reiterated that we love her, but she cannot treat us in such a manner, as it is not right. I made it clear that whether or not she liked it, I was the baby's mother, not her, so she needed to respect our wishes. Once again, I expressed our love for her and our desire to have involved grandparents in our child's life, but we also needed to work on our relationship as daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. All she replied with was a Bible verse. I am quite uncertain about our next steps, but my husband wants nothing to do with her at this time. He carries considerable unresolved childhood trauma from her, and this situation has only exacerbated those feelings. I wanted to determine if we are being unreasonable in this scenario, if everyone involved is at fault, or if it is merely a misunderstanding among all parties. Story 3. Fired from my job, but received a year's worth of pay and got my boss fired. This incident took place in the early 2010s, prior to the significant advancements in video editing and content creation technologies. I was employed as a content creator by a university that aimed to utilize YouTube to launch its branding campaign. The compensation was modest, approximately $2,200 US dollars, and during that period, there were relatively few video content creators, making the entire process quite time-consuming from inception to completion. On my second day of work, my manager outlined my key performance indicator of producing 85 videos, each between 3 to 10 minutes long, within a span of 52 weeks. This task proved daunting for a one-person operation back then. I was responsible for scripting, production, casting talent, filming, composing music, since they were unwilling to invest in a royalty-free music subscription and editing. Furthermore, I had to rely on my own equipment and software, as their cameras and computers were outdated and incapable of handling tasks even at 720p resolution, let alone 1080p. I attempted to convey my concerns to my manager, but she merely smiled encouragingly and urged me to give it a shot, reassuring me that if the quality of the videos was high, she wouldn't worry about the quantity. Encouraged by this, I decided to proceed. In the beginning, my manager treated me well. However, one day, after discovering that I was a smoker, her demeanor abruptly changed. A colleague visibly reacted in disbelief when I shared this, informing me that the manager despised smokers and frequently advocated for their termination. Subsequently, she began scrutinizing my every move, from the smell of cigarette smoke after breaks to my occasional 5 to 10-minute tardiness, despite consistently putting in over 4 hours of overtime each day, and my unavailability during breaks. Despite this increasing scrutiny, I persevered because I simply wanted to excel in my role. 5 months later, I was summoned to the director's office, where I noticed my manager adopting her best, displeased yet delighted, expression, causing my stomach to sink. The director expressed disappointment, stating that it had come to her attention that I was falling behind in my work. By this point, we were halfway through the year, and I had only managed to complete 30 of the 85 videos. I tried to explain that I had been working diligently on these videos, logging 60 or more hours weekly, and that the challenges I faced as a one-person team made my task nearly impossible. I also pointed out that the videos I had produced garnered the highest views ever for their YouTube channel. Additionally, I reminded her how my manager had emphasized the importance of quality over quantity. The director dismissed my explanation, asserting that the objective was, in fact, to produce 85 videos within the year. With my output being less than half of the target at that point, she believed it was wise to terminate our arrangement early. I questioned how they would achieve the KPI if they dismissed me, to which my manager retorted, "We will hire a professional production company to complete your work." The director gave her a strange look but nodded in agreement, assuring me, "You need not worry, the manager will handle it." At that moment, an idea struck me. Since I was the content professional in the office, one of my responsibilities was to maintain a database of production houses to contact when larger projects required additional resources. I was confident they would rely on the production companies from my database, knowing my manager had no industry connections. Thus, I altered the phone numbers and distorted the emails for all entries except for one. For that one, I had a friend working as a junior director, not an assistant director, but one assigned to smaller video projects. I called him to share my plan, and within 2 days, they were arranged to pitch their services. I explained that this arrangement would be mutually beneficial. It would help him advance his career by bringing significant business to his production house while also providing me with financial gain. I promised to guide him on how to pitch effectively to impress both my former manager and the director. In return, his company would pay me a standard finder's fee of 15%. He agreed immediately and connected me with his general manager, who, upon realizing this would involve 6 months of work with a lucrative payout, quickly concurred and drafted a contract. After I provided them with a metaphorical, step-by-step playbook, my friend's production house emerged as the perfect fit, demonstrating a clear understanding of the university's needs and the themes they wished to highlight. Both the director and my previous manager were astonished by how well my friend's team grasped their content, leading them to secure the contract immediately. However, enlisting a production house back then was not inexpensive. Each video they produced could cost 2 to 3 times my monthly salary, given that specialized personnel handled each aspect: producer, director, director of photography, gaffer, sound person, video editor, assistant director, production assistants, etc., allowing them to complete a video every 2 to 3 days. In total, they produced 50 videos in approximately 4 months, costing over 100 months' worth of my salary, while I simply sat back and collected a healthy 15%, which amounted to roughly 15 months' salary. This enabled me to save for a vacation and use the remainder to further my education at a reputable film school abroad. I believed my plans had concluded, having taken my revenge on my former bosses, but to my surprise, I received a call from my colleague while vacationing in Bali. This was the same colleague who had reacted when I disclosed my smoking habit. She informed me that my former manager had been terminated and that the director had faced severe reprimand from the chancellor of the university. The content creation project for which I was originally hired was allocated a budget equivalent to about 1.5 years of my salary, yet they had exceeded that budget by over 10 times. My former manager had become so desperate to complete her project that she disregarded all caution, paying any amount necessary to finish the work, hoping to demonstrate to the director that she had delivered results, and had approved the excessive expenditure without the director's consent. Thus, this is how I facilitated my friend's rapid promotion to full director at his production company, while effectively securing a year's salary after being unjustly dismissed from my position.